Hello and welcome to another fantastic Love Reading author event. My name's Joy Court and I'm lucky enough to be one of the reviewers here on Love Reading. And I could not be more thrilled to be talking about what I already know is going to be one of the books of 2025. Publishing on the 2nd of January by David Fickling Books, Let the Light In is an extraordinary book. Powerful, tender, utterly compelling. I've just read it for the second time and it held me in a completely visceral grip, even though I knew what was going to happen. Somewhat unusually, this is also a book with two authors, and even more unusually, two related authors. One is a name which I'm sure will be familiar to any YA and literary fiction fans, the wonderful Jenny Downham. Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
I can still vividly remember the impact of her debut novel, Before I Die, which was published in 2007. I was pitching it at a YLG Carnegie nominations event in the West Midlands and absolutely unable to control my tears. The story of a 16-year-old girl dying of leukemia, sold in 35 languages, won the Branford Bowes Award, the Australian Silver Inky Award for Best International Novel, and was made into a blockbuster movie, Now Is Good, starring Dakota Fanning. Her second novel, You Against Me, won the Waterstones Teenage Fiction Prize. And her third novel, Unbecoming, won the Stonewall Honor Award from the American Library Association. Her fourth novel, Furious Things, was longlisted for the UKLA Book Awards and the Carnegie Medal, and shortlisted for the YA Book Prize and the Costa Book Awards. And I predict great things for this, the fifth novel. Jenny trained as an actor and worked in alternative theatre before starting to write, which is another link to her son and co-author, Louis Hill. Hello, Louis.
Hello.
As an actor, his credits include a wide variety of stage, screen, and voiceover work. And as a writer, he has written a number of plays and short films, including his one-man show, Love and Tigers, which opened to sell-out audiences and five-star reviews for a limited run at the Hen and Chickens Theatre. His short stories have been featured in a number of publications, and Let the Light In is his debut novel, and what a debut it is. But I'm also really delighted to be joined by Sophie, a fellow bookworm and friend of Love Reading from Shooters Hill in London. Sophie's studying for her A-levels, including English, and likes all genres of books, she tells me, but if pushed, would admit she loves a romance. Sophie's obviously the target audience for this book, and so I'm really delighted to be able to hand over the questioning to her expert hands. Hello, and over to you, Sophie.
Hiya. Just a few questions, obviously, about the novel, just to make sure that everyone understands why you wanted to write it, and really how powerful that you think it is that you're able to sort of put this story out. But the first question for both of you is obviously, how do you go about writing a book with two authors? Do you find that there's a system that works really well for you, or do you sort of just go with the flow and see where it takes you?
Well, neither of us had ever done it before, so we were kind of making it up as we went along. I do know other authors who have co-written books, and they've written a chapter each, and it's like a conversation between them. One of them would write a chapter, send it to the other one, and there would be no editing or even conversation between them. We didn't do that. We were bubbled up together during the pandemic, so we had to talk to one another. And it started really as something that we did because we're both actors, we're both writers, and we wanted to keep creative. So it just started as a writing challenge. We didn't know we were going to write a novel. So we set each other writing tasks, and then we began to realize that these two characters, Charlie and Leah, were appearing more frequently in our exercises. And then perhaps, Louis, you want to talk about how we handled the dual procedure.
Yeah, I think we started to realize as these characters came out that they were definitely going to be the central characters of a book. I wanted to kind of move on from the writing exercises after a while, Um, and it was generating loads of interesting ideas and content, but I was kind of chomping at the bit to just begin writing what this story was. And so we began, and we, I think, identified quite quickly that our writing styles sometimes differed a little bit. And one of the things we decided to do was something we called Rush Week, which kind of involved us writing a chapter a day each and sending them back and forth to each other over the course of a week. And a bit like a game of consequences, we would kind of try and pick up where the other person left off, but we weren't strict about continuity or really anything. If you wanted a chapter to go in a slightly different direction, just take it that way. And Rush Week turned into Rush Month, which kind of turned into Rush sort of several months, really, Rush 6 months, perhaps. And we just went and went and went and went and went. And it was amazing fun and took a lot of dedication, I think. And at the end, we had this sort of big, heavy first draft of a kind of book that was way too many words and was largely nonsense in a lot of ways because it just bits of it didn't connect or themes were dropped and then picked up later on. But we thought, oh, there's something here. This is really interesting and exciting. And I think a big thing that we really enjoyed was we took ownership of a character each, and that made it kind of made it a lot more unpredictable about what would happen next, because maybe I wanted Charlie to do something that Mum didn't, but she had less control over that and vice versa. And so off we went into kinds of all different directions.
We actually thought it would stop there. But we had a first draft. We thought, that's it. That's all there is. Because we both, the world opened up. We went back to our normal lives. And we did get a bit stricter then, didn't we, with the second, third, fourth, and fifth drafts, because we actually communicated about story structure, and we did lots of long papering where we just got rolls of paper out on the floor and drew the structure, drew the plot, drew the characters. We moved the salt and pepper pots all over the table to represent different things. And we just redrafted and got rid of all the extraneous stuff and built bridges between the gaps.
I think that the dual POV and sort of both of them being separately constructed but also really like interwoven with each other is a really nice feature of the book, and you being able to construct the characters sort of independently but also together, I think that really brings it together nicely. But were there ever times where you sort of wished that you sort of had more control over Charlie than Leah, or Leah than Charlie, and could sway their decisions a little bit?
That's a really good question. We did sometimes, as a writing exercise, write the other one, but it was very rare. We probably did it 2 or 3 times, didn't we? And I'm not sure we used any of that material, but it was just to sort of get some kind of empathetic thing. I think the hardest thing for me was that I was very aware that each of the characters knew things about their lives which the other one didn't know. And then when they met, it would be really boring for the reader to Charlie to go, "Hey, Leah, guess what I've been doing?" And the reader's like, "Oh, we didn't know what you've been doing. Why are you telling your sister?" But she didn't know. So actually it was kind of, for me, that was the trickiest bit.
Yeah, I think also we had a conversation quite early on about wanting to make sure that these felt like 2 individual characters, but didn't necessarily feel like they were written by 2 writers who weren't really communicating. We wanted it to feel like you were reading a single coherent narrative throughout. So that was a conversation we had early on, and then it meant that we had to later on do lots of work just to calibrate a lot of the styles of writing and a lot of the language to make it a bit more, coherent and singular.
Do you think this would be a good idea now for us to hear a bit of the 2 individual voices? If you'd like to read us a portion, I think that would be great.
Yeah. I'll just read like a minute from the first chapter, which is Leah's chapter. I won't read the whole chapter, but it will give you enough to get a little bit of the style. So this is chapter 1. I check how I look in the bathroom mirror. The flickering light bulb doesn't help. I run my fingers through my hair and retouch my lip balm, trying to see myself through Alex's eyes. He told me once that I looked like a girl in a painting by some Russian artist. He showed me a picture on his phone. She had pale skin, dark hair piled up, a book in her hand. I liked him thinking I looked like a famous painter's muse. It's true, I can look pretty when I try, Tonight, I've used a foundation with tiny sparkles in it and mascara. It's like putting on a disguise. I almost look sophisticated. It's like there used to be a secret, unnoticed Leah who I hardly dare believe in. And now she's come to life. I'm no longer just the boring schoolgirl, the reliable daughter, or the person to turn to when the washing machine breaks. I'm so much more because of Alex. I squint at myself in the mirror and imagine his eyes grazing the length of me when we meet in an hour's time. You, Leah, are the best secret of my life. The spell's broken by Abby, ramming the bathroom door with her little fist, demanding I let her in to pee, and further broken by Charlie bolting out of his bedroom when he spots me attempting to sneak downstairs wearing my favourite jacket. He skids to a halt. Where are you going? Study session. Looking like that? Looking good makes me study harder, Charlie. You're wearing makeup. I turn on the stairs and flutter my eyelashes for him. Got to make the effort for A-levels. Or what about dinner? Up to you. He sighs and plonks himself on the top step. What am I supposed to make? You're 15, Charlie. Work it out. I'll do it, Abby says, coming out of the bathroom and wiping her wet hands down her jeans. I'll do toast. No, I tell her, Charlie's perfectly capable of making food, plus you're only 7.5. She sits next to Charlie on the step and grins up at me. Can I help, though?
I'll do just the beginning of Charlie's first chapter as well. Charlie. Mum, I say softly. Mum, you awake? She makes a moaning noise like waking up is the worst idea in the world, then flicks her eyes open and straight away shuts them again. Mum. Gorgeous boy. There's sleep and slowness in her voice. I step into her bedroom. It's dark and the air has the weight of a room that's been occupied too long. I wondered if you wanted something to eat. Let me look at you. Shall I turn on the light? No, leave it. She squints at me in the gloom, seems to reassure herself it really is me, then closes her eyes again. Not hungry then. What have you been up to? She asks. Drawing? Not tonight, Mum. It was a neighbour who sent her spiralling back to bed this time. Mum was halfway across the courtyard on her way to collect Abby from school when Mrs. Shah, the retired woman from 3 doors down, asked Mum if she was interested in joining the Tenants Association. Don't people realise you can't just ambush people and ask them to do stuff? Not everyone wants to be involved. I perch on the edge of her bed. How are you feeling?
I think that wonderfully demonstrates the way you layer the story. So both narrators are giving us a little bit of the back. You're building the background, but nothing is repeated. It's astonishing, I think. Very clever. And sorry, Sophie, over to you.
Obviously, with the story, I don't want to give too much away, but there's some quite like real life experiences in there that are possibly quite traumatic and maybe challenging for you to write as well. Like for instance, obviously Alex and Leah's relationship, and perhaps even the loan sharks as well. They're things that are quite prevalent in society. And how do you go about writing something that's quite raw and quite challenging?
I think that's a really good question. I think for me, young people's lives are often full of difficult things, and I have always, in all of my books, which have all been standalone books, contemporary, looking at these kind of issues, have wanted to put something that's really truthful on the page. But I think you have to be cautious, is probably the wrong word, but you have to be really sensitive about it. And for me, it's about doing excellent research on the ground, talking to people who have that lived experience if you don't have it yourself. In terms of the loan sharks, we looked at lots of documentaries. There's loads of videos. There's a loan shark charity. I was lucky enough to know somebody who knows someone else who works in the council who actually deals with the council side of helping tenants deal with loan sharks. So all of that kind of stuff builds a kind of a truthful picture. And I think something that really helps as well, I mean, specifically with the relationship, Leah's central relationship, is that it's really important to put other characters' viewpoints in so that it then becomes something which young people can read and think, I might not do that if that were me, but I think my friend might have done that. Or that, you can discuss it rather than us trying to say, this is how it is. We're trying to teach you. We're judging things. We're saying this person's right and this person's wrong. We're not doing that. We're saying these are hopefully complex, real characters who all are the hero of their own story. There's no baddies in a way. Even the loan sharks have got backstory. So that I think it's really important to put these things on the page.
Yeah, I think I also, in some ways, one of the challenges, especially with stories about loan sharks, our story about loan sharks, was the more we researched it, the more I think kind of shocked by the reality of what that can be like and the kind of tactics that are used or the kind of impact it can have on people's lives and the sort of really surprising amounts of money that are going back and forth based on original loans. I think the challenge for us was, if anything, making what is already real and shocking seem believable. I think there were sometimes concerns that if we put some of the reality down on the page, it might come across as though we'd made things up. That money couldn't possibly snowball in that way in terms of what you owe, etc. So I think we definitely had to make sure that everything we put down was totally truthful, but also just make sure that we introduced it in a way that seemed realistic and seemed wouldn't shock somebody too much at first if they didn't know anything about the topic.
Yeah, I think that that's really fair enough. And you can really tell that it's very carefully crafted because it doesn't seem too full on, but at the same time, it is also important enough to be able to take note of it and be like, oh, this isn't quite right. But do you think it's really important that authors actually put these like real messages in their story to try and convey that these are real emotions? And especially with the grief being one of the reoccurring films in the book as well, it's really important that that's sort of like told to your readers. Would you agree with that?
I think definitely yes. I think stories have such a amazing capacity to give a reader or somebody watching it or experiencing it a chance to kind of practice life a little bit. They demonstrate what other people might do in a certain situation and let you gauge what you think about that. And I think putting big issues into stories and complicated issues is a great way for especially young readers to go, what would I do in that situation? And why wouldn't I do what that character's done? And what do I think and feel about it? And it's a great way to prepare people for when they maybe encounter difficult situations and to kind of build your opinion of what you think of the world around you. So I think putting big, difficult topics in, not all the time, but it's really valuable. And I think it's really important to have that in as many stories as possible.
And authors tell me once that it's writing for teenagers is when you can actually tackle these really big topics, because they're the ones that are brave enough to read it. As adults, as I've already admitted, we're in floods of tears all the time because life is like that. But teenagers, this is when they're making up their minds about the world, I think. Yeah.
Sorry. I think it's also that it is an experience, like in terms of, for instance, Leah's relationship. We can't ignore the fact away that young people are beginning to have relationships themselves, and if we don't put anything like that in a book, then there's no space, as Louis said, to sort of safely look at that. To me, it's always seemed a bit like a vaccine. When I was a kid, I was absolutely terrified of the world ending. And I was completely drawn and read over and over again Robert C. O'Brien's Zephyr Zachariah, which is about the world ending. And I couldn't really make up. I was like, why am I drawn to this book? It's got a big nuclear mushroom on the front. Absolutely terrifying. But for me, it was a safe space to look at the sole survivor of the world who's left in the story and think, okay, not that I thought it would happen to me, but that if any difficult things did happen, to sort of look at what she did and think, could I do that? Could I be that brave? Could I be that resourceful? So it felt like a vaccine, like you get a little bit of the thing so that you avoid the bigger thing.
I'd say that Charlie and Leah definitely seem to capture some kind of quintessential sense of being young, and especially being English as well. I think that there's some really nice like traditional themes woven in there. But how do you go about sort of removing yourself from your own environment and being able to craft a character who maybe isn't as similar to you?
For me, I guess I'm just drawn to I like writing for teenagers because they're on the cusp of adulthood and you can go backwards and forwards into childhood, and they've got gatekeepers, so it's a great narrative thing. But also, I've been a teenager, and I don't know why I remember it really clearly, but I do. And I think that all my writing has always been drawing on things that have really happened, emotional truths, and sort of putting them in other bodies in this. And I guess that might come from acting. I mean, both Lou and I have acting backgrounds, and I spent 7 years in a theatre company where we worked without scripts. We would turn up at a venue and just go, what do you want to see a show about? And make it up on the spot. So I'm quite used to sort of putting the imagination, mix it with a bit of reality, and obviously with a book, a lot of research, and create something new. So it has got me in it, but it's sort of, I'm at a distance.
I think that exploring that distance is quite exciting as a writer, because you can pepper parts of your own life into these stories. And I think in a sense I had to do a little less mental gymnastics, in the sense that I grew up in London, I live in London, I've always lived in London, and to kind of explore some of the feelings I had when I was 15 and growing up in London. What was that like, to be able to put that into a book? Obviously Charlie's story takes several turns that don't reflect my experience, but I think that was so much fun and kind of cathartic in some ways. But I also think it's really important that what the thing you're writing is your kind of therapy, that you're putting all of the stuff you kind of think you should probably be exploring with, by talking to someone, and putting it onto the page, and suddenly it's this messy thing that maybe isn't as good. For us, it was so much fun to allow flecks of ourselves to find themselves in the characters and kind of see where they would go with that little seed.
You've mentioned as well that you both had like acting backgrounds. So would you say that writing and sort of being so like engrossed by English, did that come suddenly, or has it always been something that you're quite passionate about?
For me, it was, I loved English at school, and I was in all the school plays, and I went to university and did an English and drama degree, and then I went to drama school and trained as an actor, and I couldn't really decide which I wanted to do. So I'd always written, and the theatre company that created their own scripts was heaven, because it was both. But then when Louis came along, it was very difficult to keep touring as a parent, because you have to take your baby with you everywhere. And when he had to go to school and then his brother came along, it was just impossible. And so for me, then it became quite a natural, leap to begin to write stories as opposed to walk them. But it was a great apprenticeship to actually understand story kind of on your feet. And I think a lot of writers, they often find it more difficult to write away from the desk. And I just think that, well, certainly Lou and I've always done it before as well, we use a lot of acting exercises. So if you can't think of what to do on the page, you don't just sit there, you get up and you might dress up as them, you might go for a walk and pretend you are them, you might practice their scenes out loud, whatever you can think of. But I've always liked both. I don't think I'll ever go back to acting now, but maybe I will. We're doing the audiobook for this together, which we're both really, really thrilled about. So that's acting.
Yeah, anyway. I can't remember ever dressing up as Charlie or Leah myself, but maybe that was something you were doing and not mentioning.
I did that for Before I Die. I didn't do it for this.
For me, I think lots of authors often talk about the beginning of their writing journey, about whether they did or did not have books in their house. And for me, there were a load of books. There were a lot of books. Both my parents read and write constantly, as you can imagine. And so it meant that also, I think Mum's background in acting, there was just stories in the house. For me, though, writing a book, or indeed writing when I was younger, wasn't something that I was drawn towards as much as acting was. I was in youth theatres and I did it at GCSE and A-level, and then I went to drama school. I also had a professional agent when I was 16, so started working from then, went to drama school, came out, and then carried on working as a professional actor, as I still do now. I think that, so then what happened was, during drama school, I started to write plays. In my first year, secretly was writing little bits of theatre here and there, and throughout my time at drama school, I was able to, my dissertation was a play that I wrote, and we do a showcase in third year at drama school that is a demonstration of everything you've done in the year, and you can try and get an agent with it. And I wrote my scene with a friend. Then when I graduated, I carried on writing theatre and writing short films. And it was only then when me and Mum in 2019 decided to write a TV pilot together that we started writing for the first time with one another. And still then, I wasn't thinking, maybe I'll write a book next. It was when Mum was like, should we write something again? And it went from there. What's really interesting is, as I look back over my time as an actor and my current career as an actor, it's so completely linked. The conversations about character and story and plot and motivation and backstory and characterization, how you would, take on a role, is just linked with how you would write it in a book. And interestingly as well, I think writing a book, you get to do all of it. You get to do the whole creative process. With a play or a film, you might just write, Charlie walks over there, and you let everyone else, the director, can figure out what that will look like, and the lighting designers will light it and everything. But with a book, you do all of it. You are the director and the lighting designer and the sound designer and the actor and the costume designer and everything. And to be able to combine the two, to read them out loud, to read out loud what I'm writing, and to walk it through with Mum, or to see what it looks like on its feet, or indeed to read the audiobook, I think the two are just a natural combination.
Yeah, and I think as well, the book's very unique, and it stays sort of true to itself in a sense where it's very sort of open to interpretation in a sense, because obviously you've got all of the opinions as you were talking about, and it encourages you to sort of make your own decisions about what's right and what's wrong. But what would you say necessarily inspired you to write your characters in this way? Was there a particular reason why you wanted to write the story in the way that you did?
I think Charlie and Leo, we didn't plan for them. They came out. I was still thinking, if we do end up writing something together, it's quite difficult. We couldn't write a son and a mum in a story, because I wasn't sure that would be particularly end up being a book that young people would want to read. And a lot of dual narratives are romance, and that felt inappropriate as well. So to do a brother and a sister, and to put the family, we were in lockdown in a house together with Louis's brother, and family, and the kind of the claustrophobia and all of that. It just came out. That's just what happened. In terms of, it's geographically, as Louis already said, it's set in North London, which is where Lou was brought up and where I still live, and where we were locked down together. So all of that felt as if that was very natural. And I guess, I still live where the boys were brought up, and so I still have a lot of contact with people with kids of that age, and finding out what's going on for them, it just seeps in. It often isn't really a conscious process, and it's only at the end where you kind of think, oh, I know where that came from now. I'm not necessarily really aware of it in the writing process.
Yeah, I I would agree. I think there were lots of moments where maybe I can look back on parts of it and go, that, of course that's that. But ultimately, a lot of it came out of nowhere. One thing we did do at the very beginning was, in 2019, I wrote a one-man show that was mentioned in the introduction, Love and Tigers, which I put on. The mum came and saw, and we used that as the loosest jumping off point at the very beginning. And still, there's just little touches of it that permeate the book. There was a very important younger sister character in that. There was grief, and there was a young male protagonist as well. And using that as a starting off point, and then basically immediately letting it go, I think was helpful for both of us finding a kind of common ground to get started on.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think that acting as well and having that background in drama really helps bring out that creative process? Or do you say that that's a combination of both?
I have met very few people who I've been able to have, it's like a shorthand dialogue. I often, because I do a bit of teaching, and I often kind of go, so when you're off stage, or when you bring the props on, and they're like, what? Because I'm talking about the page and not the stage, actually, and I'm not talking about props that are tangibly in your hands. But working with Lou, we had, I think from the very beginning, because of that acting background perhaps, and also because we know each other really well, a shorthand which despite the fact it took us 3 years to write the book, actually made it very quick as well. Sometimes we'd be able to kind of cut to the chase really quickly.
Yeah, I think also we've both been in rehearsal rooms in our lives and in our careers, and we both know what it is to start out with nothing in a creative sense and just go, let's throw some ideas out there. There's no bad ideas. It's okay to look a bit silly, or it's okay to suggest something that you both actually think about and go, that's completely crazy. Of course we can't have that in. And that shared creative understanding about how a project can start, I think meant that we were rarely embarrassed to suggest anything and rarely felt silly. And also, I think very visually when I write. I kind of imagine where the lens is going to be, where the camera's going to be looking. And I think I was able to discuss that with mum as well, because we had that shared dialogue. The number of times we were going, so if that's like that, and then that's like that, and then it was on the page, was really useful to create work that we were both, as invested in.
Having said that, when you're reading the book, you can really see, like, it almost feels as if you're there in the room. It's so, like, it totally catches you and you're like, wow, this is amazing. And it's definitely one that's difficult to put down. But if you were to say, like, you had obviously coming from very English loving households, what would you say is like a book that really encouraged you to start this whole writing process, and one that you'd say really is one that you'd hold very close to your heart?
I mean, I've already mentioned Sefer Zechariah, which is the book that for me made me feel as if I'd discovered a secret about the world, which was, I came from, unlike Louis' experience, my house had no books. I grew up in a house where reading wasn't important. My parents had left school at 14 and my mother never read a book in her entire life, and she died at 84. She didn't even read my books. And so Sefer Zechariah was important because I remember sitting at the dinner table once and I just put the book down and I felt like I had this secret world in my head and everyone else was just in my hometown having their Sunday lunch. And I was in America, the world had ended, the crops were growing for the first. And that for me is the quality I look for in the books that transport you. And Wolf Wilder does that beautifully. I actually had to cover myself in blankets when I was reading Wolf Wilder because it was snowing and I got cold. I've just finished rereading Eva Ibbetson's again, which again were very favourite books of mine, The Secret Countess. And again, they just transport you, and that's what I look for in books. But I mean, in terms of special books, Sefer Zechariah I just reread it all my childhood, just over and over, terrifying myself. Yeah.
I think that when I was a kid, the books that I read as a boy were often the young spy books, like the Alex Rider books or the Young Bond, or specifically the Cherub series by Robert Muchamore. I think those were an example of books that for the first time I was rereading. I was actively like, I want to experience this exact story again, and I want to. I'm off sick from school, and I'm just going to read this whole book. And so those hold a special place in my heart. And while they don't necessarily directly impact this book, I suppose they do. Stories of young people facing big problems. They just happen to be big problems that involve the security of the UK, as opposed to a smaller story. And when we were writing this, I, as an actor, am lucky enough to also narrate audiobooks. So that's a big part of my other career. And one of the ones that I read that I remember really finding impactful was The Eternal Return of Clara Hart by Louise Finch, which I narrated as the audiobook, so please go and check it out. But it was one of the only books that when we were on a break, me and the engineer who was helping record it sat down and went, wow, this is great, isn't it? This is so interesting. And as two young men, we discussed, wow, what is it to be a young man and have these responsibilities, and to the kind of language that you use and the kind of way that you might treat women, or you did when you were younger, or how does that all make us feel now as adults? And it was a kind of really impactful and meaningful moment. And it's a book that I guess I've technically read twice, once in prep and once for the recording. And I still think about that book even now when I'm writing stuff, and it came out a couple of years ago.
How powerful do you think it's for both of you to think that these are books that you hold very closely to your heart, but how powerful is it for people to read what you've written and read the characters that you've crafted and feel that same sense of that, like, so being captivated by what they're saying? Would you say that that's really important to you?
I didn't know. I think when you write a book, and Luke can tell you whether this is true for him now, but when I wrote Before I Die, I had absolutely no thought about what somebody might think reading it. I just wanted to tell the story. And I got quite a lot of letters and emails when that book came out. And I was so shocked and moved that people could have such positive responses to it. And it's always just felt like a real privilege to be able to affect them, because I sort of didn't make the leap. I feel that way when I read books. I think, oh, I have to write to the author. They're amazing. But I didn't at least think somebody might think that about my books. But when I wrote Furious Thing, Furious Thing is about a very angry young woman, but it's also about emotional abuse. And I was doing an event in an American library, and an adult male, he was probably about 65 years old, came up to me and he said, I've just read your book and I think I might be John, which is the guy who's being abusive in the book. And he said, and I just want to thank you for that. And I was like, I don't care if no one else ever reads another book of mine. That just felt like such an important thing. So I think, you just have no idea. Most people who read books, they don't write to the author, do they? They just read the book and what effect you have, which is why it feels like not only a privilege, but how kind of careful you have to be, which is why we do so much careful research and hopefully think really carefully about what you're putting on the page, because you just don't know who's going to read it and how it will affect them.
For me, this is the first time, obviously, I've written a book. And so it's you, Sophie, are the first person who is the target demographic for our book that has spoken to me about it face to face. And so I'm telling you what it's like in the moment. It's kind of wild. I did not think about the idea that somebody would read this book, quite as Mum says, while we were writing it. And it's only very, very recently I've started to conceptualize the idea that people are reading it and people are going to have things to say. My friends are reading it and there will be feedback and it will make people feel things, hopefully.
Well, I think it certainly has made us feel things. Wouldn't you agree, Sophie?
Definitely. I remember I emailed Joy, because Joy emailed me and said, have you finished it? And I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. I couldn't put it down. I finished it in like 3 days. But I think as well, like, it's nice that authors want to target children with books that are more complex and more challenging for them, instead of sort of dulling it down and making it be like, oh, well, life's like sunshine and rainbows. It's really nice for us as like growing into adults as well, to be able to actually be met with these adult issues that people would sometimes be too scared to say to you, like, oh, well, this is real life. But it's really nice to be able to read that and, as you said, form our own opinions about it and sort of really look into our lives and think, are these the kind of examples that we want to lead by? Are they what we want to avoid? And I think that that's really powerful.
I think it's really important to leave space for a reader. I like to be, well, when I read, I don't want to be reliably informed. I want to feel as if I'm clever and I've got something from the book myself. So I think it's really important not to patronize young readers. They are great at getting stuff. So it's very dangerous to think they're not. But also, we've been talking about the difficult issues in the book, but the book is also, it's very important to us. It had quite a lot of joy in it as well. Obviously, it's called Let the Light In. And although it has got some difficult subjects, there's quite a lot of humour in the book as well. And the little sister, Abby, for us was such a joy to write. We both tried to put her in as many scenes as possible, I think, because she's just delightful. So she holds a lot of the joy in the book. And she has a very positive attitude to everything, and is also party to, she's quite clever and canny, so she's party to quite a lot of stuff that happens, and gets stuff and says the truth and asks difficult questions, which can be quite humorous as well. So that was really important.
I also think, just to add on with the joy and the right, I mean, such a fun element of writing with another person is when you're writing the fun stuff, because you get immediate feedback on what's funny, what's not. You get somebody going, ha 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 ha, you've written that really well, that's really funny. And you go, yeah, great, I've done it. I'm glad that joke landed. Whereas when you're writing on your own, especially if you're writing a book, it might be years before anyone reads anything you've written. And all your very clever, very funny jokes aren't necessarily being read by anybody. And it's so, I think it's so fun to be able to share that with somebody else in the moment while you're writing it, and to laugh along with what's happening with the characters, or cry along with what's happening with the characters with somebody else in the moment.
Well, I can't believe in the moment how quickly these moments have gone. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to the discussion between all of you, and it is such a special book coming out in January. Let the light in. Whatever you do, don't miss getting hold of a copy of this. It is, as I said, I know already it's one of my favourite books of 2025. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.